come for murder pussy hole in here tonight. But the rascal, them things that them a deal with, them can't test Kalashnikov. Mister, them can't test Kalashnikov. Man figure murder on you tonight. Pussy hole for dead. Tell them no Rasta.
What? K, lash your ass, Clark, neck off. I split you in half like a gun blast from Lennox. Hotter than flammable rocks. From the manor where man a animal, yamming you like fox. Expert slush, we specialise in handling cock. With man's hatching and planning plots, looking to jam in your spot. But their stamina's not up to par. Get ripped apart like Red Rizzler, Taras. This is terra firm, dog art, state of the art. But tell them jankros to stay in the yard or get stabbed with a stake to the art. I'm trying to walk a straight path, but you know say it's hard. Sick thoughts of flinging on mask and killing your Clark. Keep running through the back of my head like old dance steps. Get dropped on your doorstep like Dando. Many man ran prank cause my nang flows better than Taliban, still ban shows. Spit flows over Bangra. Spit so cold, make you shock out like it was soca. Terror firm takeover. Take you through the mind state of a tortured soldier who tells tales of unspeakable horror with lyrics lethal like Bora. Leave you leaking on the floor, star. That's why I don't watch no talk. I read auras and books written by forbidden government authors. Infiltrate your border like ITM reporters, then return with the slaughter. Captured on camcorder, I'm trapped in a damn corner. Chatting to Pandora about boxing a man for her, but she don't know me. Kalashnikov, that black cunt from out of Stokey. Banana boat, mango munching monkey. Kick off your door like Jumanji. Dash you off the 28th floor like it was bungee. I want the blood clean. The blood clean. Yeah.
It's murder.
When man test the terra firma.
It's murder.
Rays getting buried in suburbia.
Murder.
Man shotting rock to make a earner.
It's murder.
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 Them man can't test the terra firma.
It's murder.
They'll find your body buried in suburbia.
It's murder.
Try tech man for fucking Tina Turner.
It's murder.
It's murder.
It's murder.
It's murder. I'm not ready to die, but ever ready for bury a guy. They're not ready for I can see the fear in their eye. Scared of the rhymes that ricochet and tear them inside. Some fear for their life, preparing, trying to stare in my eyes. Wife cry bucket of tears when the brig get ice. But that's life, it's all live. Ride rhythms like a dive. Spit cyanide alive and blind your left eye. Subliminal crime, snipe you in the back of your mind. With killer quotes and one lines that cut throats like knives. Baffle the vibes, can't fathom how the fuck did he die. One tux in a tie with 21 bucks to the sky. Asking me why, but brethren is deeper than I. There's peace by my side, looking to eat a piece of the pie. So come in peace or draw your piece, or please reach for the sky. My ether is 9, like 9 millimeters time 9 millimeters time 9 millimeters from your spine. So tech time, my rhymes tech life like tech 9s. And we tech wise from guys who flex their chest size.
Tell him again, road boy, man.
Some better step wise.
Murderation.
Let me tell you, blood.
It's murder.
When man test the terra firma.
It's murder.
Rays getting buried in suburbia.
Murder.
Man shotting rock to make a earner.
It's murder.
It's murder.
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 Them man can't test the terra firma.
It's murder.
They'll find your body buried in suburbia.
Murder.
Try tech man for fucking Tina Turner.
Murder.
It's murder.
Murder.
Murder. Banner the spanner banner with a black bandana. Dari D the Dan Dapper. Wrap the trees like strapper. Stab a beat with a dagger. The hackney hack attacker. Shabby like Shabba. Shabby like Shaggy versus the Shucker. In this 6-6 city situation get butters. Man switch like Baracas. Come swinging like McGuigan with a barrage of punches. The spit boxing champion who spark man unconscious and knock out their dentures. See the drugs don't work, they just make you worse. Man smoke a little merch and feel say he can't get hurt. That's absurd, you get sliced and served like hors d'oeuvres. Bury 6 feet deep like sword in the dirt. Or you fraud shot work from the back of your mercs. I reverse the earth, stick 'em in the back of the boot and baffle you fools. You can't tackle this you or tackle my crew. Get beaten till you're blacker than blue. While I'm strapping a zoo, you're on the floor catching a boot. Looking to catch a blind blood, that's a catch 22. Yeah, and you done know the coup. Yeah. It's murder. When man test the terra firma. It's murder. Rays getting buried in suburbia. It's murder. Man shotting rock to make a earner. It's murder.
Pepsi Watson, Crime and Justice TV, broadcasting today on Tuesday the 9th of July 2019. It's a privilege and a pleasure to see you all this evening. So let's get cracking. Fresh content, Crime and Justice TV. So this video is about my time spent in the cesspit of humanity that is HMP Winchester on Sea Wing in 2016 and 2017. So the reason I ended up being sent to this prison was because I was on license, subject to the IPP life license. I was on license for 6 years. I had had a relationship breakdown and I relapsed back into crack cocaine and heroin use and subsequently failed 2 drug tests, which inevitably resulted in me undermining my life license conditions, and the probation service recalled me to custody. So I was sitting in my flat down in Bournemouth. There was a knock on the door. I opened the door, 3 police officers. They walked in, didn't know what they wanted. I thought it was something to do with the neighbours, so I invited them in. I did at that time and still do today. The whole police officers in the highest regard. I think they do a fantastic job. I was down with my friend Kerry and her children down at the memorial down at Westminster, for the policeman who was killed in the Westminster terror attack, and it was a very sombre affair. And we bowed our heads and paid our respects to PC Keith Palmer. These officers walked into my home. They walked into my home, and I sat down and I welcomed them in, and they asked me for my name. I told them my name, and then that's when they said, "Please stand up." And I was like, "Why?" And they said, "Your license has been revoked. You're unlawfully at large, and we're taking you into custody." And they put handcuffs on me. I immediately went into kind of what I can describe as a state of shock, and then my reality just dawned on me like instantly. The anticipation of prison, the fear, just intense emotion, mind spinning 1,000 miles an hour. I couldn't speak, I was speechless. I was in shock, and I just kind of went all cold and empty inside. I could really feel like the coldness of my skin and the hairs on my arms standing up. I went into a court cell. I was, and I was just laying on this. It was winter. It was a few days before Christmas. I just laid on this wooden bench, this hard rock wooden bench, and then I was put into a prison van and escorted to HMP Winchester. Going into this prison was a massive shock, a culture shock. It was a hostile, violent environment. And I wasn't used to it. I'd been out for 6 years. 5 of those years I'd worked for 40, 50, 60 hours a week in the restaurant business. I trained over in West London under my auntie's guidance as a restaurant professional, and under her colleagues, my junior managers' guidance, exceptional junior managers who taught me a lot about the restaurant industry. And then I progressed on to becoming a waiter at Miller & Carter, and then eventually working as a section waiter and a trainee manager for world-renowned chef Rick Stein on the Sandbanks Peninsula on the South Coast. So I wasn't used to this. I was working 13-hour shifts, and I was used to delivering outstanding customer service excellence and treating people like Saudi princes, and dealing with tables of 12 of French women and German professionals from Siemens, and explaining to them that the sea bass, for example, swims at the top of the ocean, and the stone bass swims at the bottom of the ocean. And we the head chef, the head chef seasons the stone bass with tarragon and thyme. And when you taste the fish, I tasted it myself this morning in the team meeting. The ocean just explodes. The taste of the ocean explodes in your mouth. And then I was used to being called back to above mentioned table. Half an hour later, the stone bass was, exactly how you described it. I wasn't used to the prison, this hostile, uninviting, unforgiving environment. And I was only there less than 48 hours. I was in a double cell. It was freezing cold, 23.5-hour bang up. My cellmate was very quiet and very shady. He didn't say a lot. He used to just sit on his bed. When the tiny opportunities that we had to come out, he wouldn't come out of his cell. And then on the second day, I've come out for lunch to get this prison food on this blue plastic plate, like this mushy food, whatever it was. I can't remember. But I remember I walked into my cell after lunch, and as soon as I walked into my cell, a tall, athletic chap followed me into the cell. And he came right up close to me in close proximity. And these cells are, you know, they're tiny. As soon as you get two fully grown adult men in there, you know, there's not much space left to maneuver around. Got any burn, mate? That's what he said to me. Got any burn, mate? I said, no. And then he was just there. He didn't move. I was, you know, aware of his presence in my cell. And I said to him, can I help you, mate? And he just went like that and then looked behind him. Time kind of stood still in that very moment. It stood still, and all I could hear was the keys and the noise and the banging and the officers, bang up, everybody, get your dinner, bang up. People shouting, running around. And yeah, like time just stood still. And then I noticed, you know, this figure, this overwhelming presence of a figure in the doorway from Bristol with shorts on, with tattoos on his legs, with legs like tree trunks. You know, the meat and the muscle on him just filled the entire doorway and cast kind of like a darkness over the already dim lit cell with the artificial light, which just destroys your eyesight. You know, the longer, the more months that you're detained in these kind of places, hence the glasses. And yeah, he just stood in the doorway, and then I was like, you know, I wasn't. I think I was fearful, but not overly fearful, because I knew that I hadn't done anything wrong. But it just all happened so quickly. You know, it's a hostile environment. It's unpredictable. These things can happen at any moment. You know, so I was just confused, I suppose, confused, fearful. And then from then, you know, from the moment this big figure arrived in the doorway, things from then kind of progressed quite quickly. I heard him in a voice say to somebody out of my visual proximity. I heard him say to somebody, your cellmate wants a word with you. And you know, I now know that the person that he was, you know, inviting into the cell or tricking into my cell was my cellmate. So my cellmate, you know, he walks into the cell. As soon as my cellmate walked into the cell, the big dude on the door, he just shut the door. And then what happened now, the tall, athletic chap just inflicted the most, you know, one of the most vicious, violent, bloody attacks, physical attacks on my cellmate that I've ever seen before in prison. The guy had like a 99% punch accuracy. He never kicked him or kneed him. He just rained punch after punch after punch on him and just kept smashing him and smashing him and smashing him. Both his eyes swelled up immediately. Blood was pouring out of his right eye and his left eye. All his nose was smashed. Blood was pouring out of his nose, out of his mouth. His teeth were smashed in. And he kept saying, stay down, son, stay down. And he just kept hitting him. And my cellmate was screaming. He was screaming. But, you know, in these situations, there ain't no one coming to help you. This is why the dude's on the door, right? No one's coming to help you. There was blood everywhere. There was blood in my food, on my plate, over the floor, drops of it, puddles of it. His T-shirt was covered in blood. There was blood on the attacker, on the perpetrator. There was blood all over the wooden table, up the wall, up the door, on the bed, you know, loads of it. And I had to make a decision. I had to make a decision very quickly in my mind, and I made that decision within about 10 seconds. You know, I had to make a decision because this is my cellmate who's been attacked. And I weighed it up in my mind very quickly. I weighed up the fact that he is a bit shady. He doesn't come out of his cell. That is very suspect. And the guy is not attacking me. He hasn't at no point, even when he come in and said, have you got any burn, you know, he was fairly respectful. He wasn't rude. He's not threatening me. So I made the decision that I'm not getting involved. It was the correct decision. I later found out that he had gone Queen's evidence, or he'd stood up in court and given evidence against his two co-defendants on B-Wing, which were two Somalian drug dealers who received sentences of 12 and 14 years. And he done a deal to give evidence and got 4 years, and they had put out a contract on him. And these two guys were the guys who executed the contract. The assailant ran out of the cell, or walked out of the cell, followed by my cellmate, who crawled. That's all he could do. He literally crawled, you know, on his elbows, not even his hands, his elbows and knees out of the cell and just screamed. The officers came. In to the cell. They took me downstairs, put me in a listener's suite, a Samaritan's listener's suite, like an empty cell with no bed in it. They padlocked the door, crime scene. And then they came into the cell and they asked to check my hands. You know, thinking that I might have done it, but I was okay at that point. I knew they would check the CCTV. Then I was thinking, like, you know, are they going to think that I've grasped them up because they're, you know, too silly to realise that, you know, it's obvious who done it because the officers are just going to check the cameras. My cellmate went onto protection. He chose to go onto D wing on the numbers, on the VP wing, own protection, the rule 43. And then that was it. I'd know, you know, no one ever came to me about the situation. I think they knew that I kept my mouth shut. Both of them went down the block, probably got paid. Well, they would have got paid, you know, whatever they got paid, heroin, spice, money, phones, drugs, whatever it was. And that was my introduction to the cesspit of humanity of HMP Winchester after six years in the community. Even that experience was quite traumatizing, but long story short, I had like 6 different cellmates. I had Muslim cellmates, I had white English cellmates, I had all sorts of different cellmates. I had cellmates smoking heroin in front of me, I had dirty cellmates, messy cellmates, living in this tiny cell where, you know, where we're urinating and going to the toilet in front of each other and smelling each other's toilet. It was disgusting, it was horrible. And it was just awful. Like I said, my mental health deteriorated very quickly. There was a time scale in which I should have received paperwork from the Ministry of Justice and the National Probation Service regarding my recall. You know, there's a specific protocol and time frame where I should have received this paperwork, and I never received it. You know, so I'd been locked up indefinitely with no right to release. Only, you know, the only way I can get released is if the parole board deems my risk is manageable in the community. I've been given no paperwork as to the reasons to the recall, the legal reasons to the recall. And it was just terrifying. It was, you know, I immediately became, you know, immersed in these feelings of helplessness and hopelessness and trauma and kind of like a hyper arousal kind of flashback kind of despair at my IPP predicament, you know, for being brought to prison and detained without committing a crime. You know, it was just so difficult to accept that. It's still difficult to accept that today. I was there for 2 years without committing a crime, and I just could not get back out into the community. So I ended up, you know, I ended up down on the ones in a cell, C11. I'll never forget this. And at the time, this wing was lawless. It was a cesspit of humanity, violence. There was a drug epidemic of proportions that I've never seen before. It was long bang up, 23.5 hour bang up. There was no clean clothes. You could very rarely get out for a shower. It was hardcore, long hour bang up. You actually lost weight because the food was so terrible. You get like 2 meals a day, and the evening meal is often inedible. It was such not only such a shock to go back to this kind of hostile environment, but what was also a shock was that how much prison had changed in the 6 years that I was out. There was this particular wing, C wing, HMP Winchester, 2016 to 2017, was what I can only describe as a mass warehousing of the mentally ill with no mental health practitioners or nurses anywhere near the wing. Ran and controlled by mostly new prison officers who'd only been there for a few months. Most of them had been there less than 2 years. All the veteran 30-year, 25-year prison officer veterans, you know, with that priceless expertise in dealing with and managing and running these kind of wings, were all leaving and going to the number one governor. I quit. And the governor's like, why? And they're like, because my safety and my health and my mental health and my physical health and my family and children are more important than losing my life on a BCAT local prison landing. So the experienced officers just were dropping like flies, with 1 or 2 still around, you know, a small bunch of them still around, and those were the heartbeat of the prison. Those were the unsung heroes that kept this prison from burning to the ground, basically. This mass warehousing of the mentally ill and mass warehousing of low-level drug addicts was, in my opinion and experience while I was there, breeding ground for criminality and crime. You know, it just inbreeds entrenched pro-criminal thinking and pro-criminal attitudes. Everyone's got a phone, everyone's organising, everyone's sorting drug deals out. Now, here is the important point. This is what society, modern society, and up-and-coming legislators and modern-thinking penal reformers need to recognise. That in the same way, on these mass warehousing of the mentally ill, criminals and low-level drug addicts, the same way in which they network and plan future crime and criminal activities and borrow each other's phones, that is also going on the vulnerable prisoner or sex offender wing. So security departments have been rendered ineffective because of all the cuts and all the officers that have left. Security departments have been rendered completely ineffective to the point where a high-profile escape, riot leading to major loss of life, or the murder of a prison officer is a case of when and not if. Yeah, you heard it here first on Crime and Justice TV. That is a case of when and not if, and it'll only be then when it's going to trigger such a public outcry that change will happen. So yeah, in the same way that all that kind of criminality breeds on the main wings of HMP Winchester, A, B, and C wing, or in this story, I'm specifically focusing on C wing. That continues and happens and is realised on the sex offender wing. So sex offenders who are unmonitored, who 1 in every 4 of them on a wing full of 140 prisoners have phones. So that gives them the ability to communicate and contact with children on the outside and their victims and people that they've got orders to stay away from. At the same time, they will network, take each other's numbers. Oh, I've got access to the dark web. I've got access to the deep web. I've got access to a 7-year-old. The same way as someone on C-Wing, I've got access to 2 ounces of heroin, a kilo of heroin, a firearm. I can sort out this prison visit where we can get drugs. The paedophiles and the convicted child sex abusers on D-Wing are doing the same thing. So, and most, nearly all, in a prison such as this, HMP Winchester, just about nearly all of the child sex abusers that have been convicted who are housed on D-Wing will be released into society, into your communities, around your children. Welcome to the modern British penal criminal justice system. So, like I said, this wing, C-Wing, HMP Winchester was 24/7 chaos, mayhem, suicide attempts, drug overdose, and just pure carnage. Hour by hour, 7 days a week. We were fed by Trojan Teams, riot squad teams. You wouldn't get fed for hours and hours and hours. You're just starving hungry in your cell. These Trojan Teams would come in at midnight, with shields and bats, and they would put a plastic bag with a tiny packet of crisps, an apple or a yogurt, and this little sandwich, and they would hang it on your door, crack your door with like 8 of them, and just kick it in your cell like a dog. They'd feed you like a dog, like an animal. Just mental. At times, this kind of barbarous regime, what would happen is, which is a natural kind of thing, as human beings, the way that they react to these kind of conditions. They would get a group of 5 or 6 of them, they would come out for lunch or dinner, and they would just go crazy. They would lift up the table tennis table or the pool table. They would refuse to bang up. Where everybody's kind of losing their minds. I've never seen a scale of suffering like this. I've never seen an environment in 13 years in custody in 15 different prisons, young offenders institutions and secure units. I've never seen so many people enduring mental health breakdown in such a short period of time, many of which were actually serving short sentences. That was the thing. It was, and like prisons are a microcosm of society. So, even the way prisoners spoke to staff, it was so disrespectful. Back in the day, you'd have that rapport with officers. You need prison officers, you need them to sort your mail out, sort your visits out, check your private cash, get your trainers from reception. And the way that I used to observe people, prisoners, talking to these officers, just daily abuse. It was just relentless, and maybe that's a reflection of modern Britain and modern society, the way that people talk to people in authority. I saw female officers get urine thrown in their face on more than one occasion, and they'd go and have a shower, stick a new shirt on, and go straight back on the land and back to work. Just never seen anything like it. So back to me and my mental health. Like I said, my mental health deteriorated very quickly. I ended up in this cell on C11. I became very suicidal. I became helpless. I remember trying to get out for a phone call, and they just wouldn't let me out for a phone call. And then after about 3 days, I got out for a phone call, and then the person I rung didn't answer. And I'm gradually just losing my mind, and my mind and my existence just became darker and darker, to the point where it was just black. I felt black inside. I felt black in my mind. This just intense darkness and blackness and inescapable black cloud of doom, of impending doom and intense despair, hopelessness just overwhelmed me, and I just did not have the ability to try and ask somebody to help me. And I remember I ended up in a pitch black cell, freezing cold, naked, on my knees, on the hard, cold prison floor, with like just feeling all sweaty and dirty from the dirty prison sheet and the dirty clothes that I'd been wearing, on the floor, cold, with a sheet that I'd ripped, a noose around my throat, in a razor blade, and I was slashing up my arms, I was cutting up my wrists, and I was digging this razor blade into my neck, and I was having violent visions and violent fantasies of death, of suicide, of just pain. I just felt pain, just indescribable sensation of what I can only describe as pain, like a despair that was just felt like was just exploding out of my chest, and I could feel it in my legs and in my feet and in my hands, and yeah, I remember just crying and crying. I remember just, sort of putting this noose up, and I think I rung the bell because the prison officers come in, or if they might have checked on me, I don't know. But I also remember putting the emergency cell bell on and being left for 2 or 3 hours. I actually remember being on suicide watch with my alarm bell on for 4 hours, and then they just opened my door for dinner, turned it off and carried on walking. They didn't even look at me. And I just knew I was going to die in this cell. I knew that I was going to die in this cell. I knew that nobody would come and help me, and it was so difficult to get myself out of this hole. I couldn't get myself out of this hole. And there's a couple of things that happened, 2 or 3 things that happened. There was an officer called Yandel. He was a CM, a custody manager, or the old principal officers, the POs, 3 stripes. And he used to come in my cell. He used to stay, after his overtime. He's probably doing 80, 85-hour weeks. He used to look tired and that at the end of his shift. And he would come in my cell and sit on the chair and in the dark, and he would just sit with me. He never used to tell me what to do or tell me what he thought I should do. Veteran prison officer. This man saved my life, and I owe my life to this man, Senior Officer Yandel. I actually feel quite emotional talking about him. The London Met police officers are given medals for fighting terrorists on the streets of Westminster and Borough Market and London Bridge, and rightly so. The London Fire Brigade, running up the stairs into Grenfell Tower, risking their lives, got medals, and rightly so. But let me just educate you on something very quickly. The only reason prisons all over England and Wales at this very moment in mid-2019 are not burning to the ground, and I mean burning to the ground, because they have lost control in a lot of these prisons. The only reason that they're not burning to the ground, and the only reason that, 10 times, 20 times, 30 times the amount of suicides that we currently have, are not happening, is because of these prison officers, and they don't get any credit whatsoever. They don't get any credit. I don't see any credit. You know, if anything, quite the contrary. In the online cyber arena or in any kind of penal reform institutions, you've got the Butler Awards and things like that where a handful get rewarded. But these guys, I mean, they just don't get any credit, and it's a travesty. You know, they're a demoralised staff. But this guy Yandel, you know, he used to sit with me, he used to comfort me. He would tell me to cheer up. He'd say, "Look, man, life's shit, but you know things will get better." Yeah, I feel emotional again. He would give me clean clothes. He would let me out for a shower. The other officers would be trying to bang me up. I've been locked up in a cell for 10 days straight. He would tell them to leave me alone, let me have a shower. And I always used to feel uplifted, and it would give me a boost. I still felt very down and very sad and very dark and very in much pain and stuff, but he would just give me that little boost to enable me to just keep surviving, you know, hour by hour. The other thing that happened was, you know, and this is the thing, he used to go off, like, because he would be on leave or he'd have a few days off, and then my mental health, he wasn't around, so my mental health would really, really deteriorate again. I ended up not eating for an 8-day period, and then I was really ill. Like, I was really, really ill, really skinny, really ill, hadn't eaten. I was kind of like determined, I don't know, just determined to die, I suppose. I was cutting up my wrists and arms. And it was on the 8th day that I hadn't eaten. And I had like these knots in my stomach. I had no energy. And when I say no energy, you know, I'm struggling to get up off the bed and walk up and down my cell. And it was a prisoner. He had a few teeth missing. And he made the officers, you know, he said, "Open this man's door, open his door." You know, and he made the number one on the server come down and give me food. And he said, you got to eat this food. You know, if you don't eat this food, you're gonna die. Do you know what I mean? Like, and I just ate the mash. You know, when you haven't eaten for many days in prison and you're in this situation, you know, you can't eat like a massive dinner or lots of food because you just get filled up really quickly, and you know it's hard to explain really. But I just remember eating the mash, drinking the milk, eating some vegetables, and it made me feel a little bit better. And there was a smoking ban, there was no tobacco, and he gave me like a roll up, or he gave me a twos on a roll up, half a roll up, but it was really nice. Made me feel a bit sick, but it was nice. So that act of humanity, it's not even the roll-up of the food, the act of humanity, the act of love in that situation, again, potentially saved my life. It potentially saved my life because I was gone. I was fully gone to the point of no return at that stage. And again, that just kept me fighting on for a few more hours, you know, until the next day. Tomorrow's a new day. And then, you know, Yandel had come on and he'd be like, "What's been going on?" Come in my cell, sit in my cell, and he always, before he went home, he'd always come and see me. He'd always come and check on me, and I'll never forget that, man. Seeing custody manager Yandel, I'll never forget him. The third thing that happened, there was a man from Portsmouth called Daniel Paden. Now this guy was a unit, but he was a big friendly giant. He wasn't violent to other prisoners, but he was massive. This guy was massive, and he was next door to me, and he kicked off one day and smashed the office up, grabbed 2 prison officers in a headlock and dragged them into the showers. And then they folded him up, a few of them, put him in his cell. And he come out and they shook hands with him, and there was a mutual respect there. But I mean, he used to make these prison officers, the younger ones, open my door. The more experienced ones, where you had that mutual rapport and respect, you know, he was very polite in the way he would conduct himself. But when I say make them, you know, don't misinterpret that. He would be very polite and courteous the way but he would get them to open my door. And he would come in my cell and he would sit there and he would share his last 2 sugars with me. We'd have like 1 each. He'd make me coffee. And he'd just sit on the bed with me and he would hug me. He'd say, "Don't be sad, mate." That's what he used to do. He'd say, "Don't be sad, mate." And he'd go and get a roll-up off someone and we'd share a roll-up. And he'd say, don't be down, don't be sad, mate. And he'd hug me. And then in that act of love, that act of humanity, tears would well up in your eyes, because when your mental health is suffering to the extent as it was at that time for me, and your world and your existence is dark, and you don't like yourself and you don't love yourself, and you're suffering, you know, minute by minute in this kind of like despair and darkness and pain, you know, when someone shows you love, you well up and you feel like crying, and you do cry because you don't feel that you deserve that love. That's how I can describe it. You don't feel like you are, you know, worthy of that love, and that's why I would well up. I would well up and I would fight back tears. And this Danny, you know, he got me on my feet. He you know, as well as, you know, Yandel, he you know, he'd get the officers to open my door for gym when it wasn't our gym day. He was on basic regime, but he was out all the time. But yeah, we'd go down to the gym. You know, I'm like all small and skinny. He's like huge. You know, you got everyone banging out, you know, free weights in the gym. But he didn't care. He would like train with me, come back, eat some porridge. You know, and these little things, you know, used to give me such a big boost, you know, and that was what happened, you know. See, you know, the officer, Yandel, the guy who made them give me food, and Daniel Paden, you know, and Daniel Paden used to come to my door every day, 2-3 times a day, even like at 5-6 in the evening, at dinner, he'd always come to my door, give me a roll up, give me 2 or 3 sugars or whatever he would actually give you his last sugar, you know, tiny little sachet. He'd just give it to you. Yeah, I'll never forget him either. So yeah, that was it. So the longer that I was there, you know, the IMB, which is the Inmate Monitoring Board, which are just kind of like state-sponsored kind of puppets, really. They don't really have any power, but they do write extensive reports about the conditions within the prison. The chief of the IMB condemned HMP Winchester as a cesspit of humanity. When this report or briefing of this report was published in the local Bournemouth Echo, all on the internet, you know, you had comments from people in the community saying, so what? Prison's not supposed to be easy. So what? They're all rapists and paedophiles and killers in there anyway. And, you know, this is very much kind of like, you know, there's lots of reasons why this happens. And, you know, I articulate all these reasons on my channel. But basically, in a nutshell, this is low IQ, clueless, dinosaur thinking, which fuels the post-Sarah Payne, post-Jamie Bulger, dangerousness, renaissance, revenge era, no second chances, you know, state that we're in at the moment. And, you know, one of my missions, like I've said before, and which I'll keep saying over and over again, is to educate, you know, modern British society that when we harm prisoners detained in young offenders institutions and mental health facilities as well, people are detained in those places, men, women and children, and in the adult prisoner state, then when we harm them, we actually harm society. And when you treat people like animals and then you release them, they're going to behave and act like animals. So, you know, one of my missions is to educate society that for us to deliver proportionate justice for victims of crime, the proportionate justice that victims of crime deserve, then, you know, we must, when we detain prisoners, treat them with dignity and respect. The fact that they've lost their liberty is the punishment, and that is how you give proportionate justice for victims. That's how you reduce recidivism. And that is how, you know, that is how you respect the public. And the public at the moment, you know, in our Brexit paralysed government, the public, you know, they deserve so much better than these cesspits of humanity, mass warehousing of the mentally ill and low-level drug addicts. You know, society works so hard. All the people in society in modern Britain, they work so hard, and this is where your taxpayers' money goes. You know, your paying money goes to the government, and this is how they spend it on barbarous regimes of housing the mentally ill and low-level drug addicts. This is how it's spent. And then those, you know, people deteriorate. You know, if I harm you, and I accept that justice means different things to different people, but if I harm you, is proportionate justice to you as a victim of my crime toward you? Is proportionate justice me being detained for 23.5 hours a day for 1 or 2 or 3 years, developing catastrophic breakdown in mental functioning, developing personality disorders, self-harming, becoming violent, and leaving with a drug habit? Is that proportionate justice to you as a victim? I would argue that no, it isn't. So... Okay, let's crack on. Where are we? All over the internet, on Twitter and Facebook, and in the mainstream media, I observe state-sponsored propaganda pushed and promoted by self-proclaimed criminal justice commentators and so-called experts. The propaganda promoted with ruthless efficiency is a propaganda which promotes the narrative that prisons in modern England and Wales are places where diversity flourishes and tons of rehabilitation and reform is occurring all over the prison landings across the nation. Senior HMPPS officials post photos on Twitter of black backslapping, handshaking, giving each other awards and medals, all with smiles and celebratory cakes. The propaganda is ruthlessly effective in brainwashing up-and-coming next-generation academics, social workers, mental health workers, prison officers and police officers. Prisons in modern England and Wales are not places of rehabilitation and decency, like the state-run propaganda machine would have you believe. Prisons in modern England and Wales are cesspits of humanity, characterised by a mental health and drug epidemic and violence of proportions never seen before in modern penal and criminal justice system history. And I reiterate, the only reason prisons and young offenders institutions all over England and Wales at this point in modern 21st century Britain are not being burnt to the ground with major loss of life is because of the unsung, hard-working prison officers. That is a big fact. Embedded into the very culture of these institutions, mental health facilities, secure units and young offenders institutions, is a deep-rooted culture of child abuse, institutional racism and racist child murder where children are murdered for kicks, like the case of Zahid Mubarak. Former prison governors, these self-proclaimed criminal justice commentators like Atchison, government advisors such as Martin Neary, Chapman, former civil servant, these people are not experts in criminal justice. These men are experts in failure. These men are experts in near 90% child recidivism, and these men are experts in adult recidivism of 45 to 60%. These men are experts in racist child murder. Martin Neary was very close to the prison officers who actually put the racist killer in the cell in the Young Offenders Institution at Feltham, in the cell with him, who were then moved to other prisons and promoted. On the other hand, Ian Thomas, I think his name was, a governor at the time in Feltham, at that time in the early 2000s, left the prison service in disgust, at this murder. And also, I think the tipping point for him, the final mosquito bite was walking into Feltham Young Offenders to see another 17-year-old hanging from the bars. Former president of the United States of America, Barack Obama, once said, "You can change the leader or a manager 1,000 times, but to see results and serious change, you must change the entire institution." Think about that. You must reform or change the entire institution. And that's not to say that, leaders, experienced leaders, there isn't, academia research out there and work and knowledge that about changing culture in organizations, but I would rather stick with Barack Obama's standpoint of you can change the leader 1,000 times, but to completely change the institution, is the way forward when things are so bad, when it's entrenched into the, embedded into the very core of the place, the racism, the child abuse, that culture of as soon as you enter our institution, you are subhuman. All over the modern world, we see progression, some slow, some gradual. In the United States of America, we've seen a recognition of the counterproductive use of solitary confinement. A recognition, acknowledgement that the solitary confinement or Quakers experiment has been a catastrophic failure. As such, isolation and segregation has been reduced in over 30 states in the United States of America. Former President Obama passed legislation to end isolation and segregation units for children after the Kalief Browder case at Rikers Island, New York City. A controversial prison sentence in America, similar to the IPP sentence in England and Wales, 5 to life, was ruled unconstitutional and was so outlawed in the United States of America. Donald Trump has given speeches lately on criminal justice reform and said that all Americans need to be raised up from their knees. All Americans in society, whether in youth custody, adult prison facilities, or mental health facilities. In Canada, they have legalized cannabis. They are also legalizing cannabis all over the United States of America. In Portugal, they legalized all drugs in terms of up to 10 days personal supply. They treat drug addiction as a health problem and as such do not demonize and criminalize. This legislation has seen the biggest drop in recidivism of anywhere in the modern world of recent. In Holland, they are closing prisons because there's no one to put in them. Norway is leading the globe in tackling recidivism, with recidivism as low as between 18 and 20%. And what is the secret master plan to Norway's success? To treat prisoners humanely with dignity and respect. Hardly rocket science. In Saudi Arabia, women are now allowed to drive and can now attend music and sports events. Meanwhile, in 21st century modern Britain, short tariff IPPs jailed for, in the wider spectrum, low-level offences, serving banned Strasbourg condemned IPP sentences, 10 years over tariff, skinny, grey and gaunt, suffer catastrophic breakdown in their mental functioning and carve chunks out of their genitals, faces and gouge their eyes out, then slash their wrists and throats and bleed out in our Victorian draconian prison cells with emergency alarm bells flashing, unanswered for 2 hours. Prisoners leave with drug habits, then reoffend immediately. Convicted child sex abusers leave at a higher risk of harm than when they went in there. Staff are demoralised and dropping like flies right, left and centre. Barristers are on strike and men charged with murder are attending Crown Court hearings with no legal representation. Rape cases are collapsing all over the land due to the Crown Prosecution Service and the police admitting that they hid evidence that would have proven innocence to boost rape convictions to satisfy current political agendas. We have child prison suicide after child prison suicide after child prison suicide, and when they die, they are thrown into the back of a white van, blacked out, in the morning, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning, while you and I sleep oblivious, and they are hauled off to the morgue, this conveyor belt of dead children. And then when there's an inquest, the Ministry of Justice send their most experienced Queen's Counsel barristers to cover up the negligence in the child's death, and the family of the dead child has got no legal aid. Only yesterday, modern-day barbarian Boris Johnson said in the mainstream news that he would get tough on the current soft justice system, claiming he will lock people up for longer sentences. Previous Prisons Minister Rory Stewart promoted a narrative that prisons should be a place of decency. I personally have met Rory Stewart in the Houses of Parliament at Westminster, and I can vouch for Rory Stewart that he is a man who listens to people like myself with lived experience. He listens and prides himself on embracing the stories of people like myself with lived experiences. And I've got nothing but praise for Rory Stewart. So, respect to him. Current Justice Secretary David Gork is pushing the same narrative in the global political arena. So, when votes are needed, and elections need to be won, they say, longer sentences like Boris Johnson is at the moment. Then when they're in the job, they say rehabilitation. Yet at the same time, the true agenda of rogue state-type punishment progresses at a frightening pace. Basically, they just make it up as they go along, right? The longer sentences, current vote-winning agenda Boris Johnson narrative is a low IQ dinosaur clueless thinking, continuing the legacy of Tony Blair in politicising law and order, using the graves of dead toddlers Sarah Palin and Jamie Bulger as bait to win general elections. Big fact. And it just knocks the wind out of you when you see these Boris Johnson reports. He's going to get tough on soft justice. it knocks the wind out you, you know. So what do we do? You know, it's very deflating as modern thinkers and as people with pure hearts who live in the sunlight of the spirit and whom can see and live the truth and the way and the life. We must accept that current successive failing British governments are clueless about criminal justice and will continue to erode away our once great criminal justice system for their own self-seeking, political and status-seeking and financial agendas. Tony Blair, former New Labour Prime Minister of Britain, is now worth a staggering 60 million. Think of the bloodshed on this man's hands. This is a fight between good and evil. If nothing changes, nothing changes. Our faith in democracy and reform and our faith in the modern day British politician, I mean, it's just been eroded away so much, it's arguably extinct, right? So, modern thinkers, you know, we must unite in our response to oppression, and we must develop and create and establish structures and communities and companies and organizations that overwhelm our modern-day barbarous criminal justice system with waves and waves and waves of positivity and humanity and faith. The British government, you know, they won't ban the box or wipe convictions. Okay, so we shall build companies and employ ex-prisoners, and we shall take them from here and we'll take them to there, like Rick Stein did with me, like my friend Asif Khan does in East London. You know, he takes people who are potentially getting involved in knife crime or drugs or criminality, and he takes them from here and he lifts them up to here. And when he picks them up for work in the morning, their mothers come out onto the house doorstep and they hug my friend Asif Khan. They hug my brother Asif Khan. And you know they say thank you for helping my son. I'm so proud of my son, of my young lad going out to work. You know, so we'll continue to do this, and not only will we take people from here to there, we will help them and guide them to fulfill their potential. We will make leaders of them. We will make entrepreneurs of them. We will make them into the next Peter Jones. We shall make them into next generation academics. We shall make role models of them. You know, it's this is what it's about. It's about the positivity on Crime and Justice TV. And why do we embark on this revolution in criminal justice in which we create and develop society structures which help to reform ex-prisoners? We do so not only out of the respect for human life that children and adults deserve, but out of respect for victims of crime, because in our culpability and perpetrator obsessed, absolutely obsessed criminal justice system in the modern age, you know, it's not just the wider socio-economic backgrounds of that could potentially have influenced, you know, the criminal activity that is missed and never once regarded. Most importantly, the victim of the crime is completely ignored, and victims of crime in modern Great Britain are treated absolutely disgustingly. And I could give you tons of examples, and maybe that's a time, you know, to do on another day, on another video. But, you know, victims of crime must be and will be the foundation and the core fundamental cornerstone of the modern criminal justice revolution in Great Britain and America. The victim of the crime. We must begin to focus our attention on the victim of crime. That they don't have a voice. They don't have a platform. They're treated despicably. And that needs to change. We must progress toward a modern society where victims of crime are offered the proportionate justice that they deserve, and to influence a broken and barbarous regime outside the prison and criminal justice system, which contributes to the greater cause of good and also humanity. That concludes my HMP Winchester C-Wing 2016-2017 video. I hope very much that you enjoyed it. I'm going to dedicate this video to the officers, the hardworking officers. There's too many to name. Philip Ward, Daniel Brookfield, Yandell, Simon Parrish, Mr. Petty. You know, there's so many of them that helped and supported me and who saved my life. I want to dedicate this video to seeing to Unit Manager Officer Yandel, his family, his children, and I just want to thank you and wish you all the best for your future, and wish all the best to the futures of all the other prison officers I mentioned at HMP Winchester. And yeah, that's who I'd like to dedicate this video to. If there's any skilled men and women out there, please email me, links in the description. Get at me. People are dying, children are dying all over England and Wales. We can do together what we can't do alone. Whatever you do, whether you're a digital marketer, a salesman, you know, any kind of skilled person, an IT consultant, you know, if you're into media, even if you're into carpentry and things like that, you know, let's work together and let's build these structures and organizations and build these, you know, these things that I'm talking about in society where we can make a difference. You know, get at me, email me, contact me in the links that will be in this video description. So that concludes my video. As always, I wish you all good health, prosperity, blessings, and above all, may you love by recognizing yourself in others.
Everywhere that I go, everybody wants to know if I can't forget the girl. She's always on my mind. It's gonna take some time before I come to terms. See a picture on the wall, and going to the hall brings back memories. Baby, I wanna play host to her, go stop back to set my mind free. Everywhere that I go, everybody wants to know if I can't forget the girl. She's always on my mind. It's gonna take some time before I come to terms. See a picture on the wall, and go to the hall brings back memories. Baby, I wanna play host to her, go stop back to set my mind free. All this truth and separation. We work so hard to make things right, 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 things right.
Crime and Justice TV, broadcasting from Brixton in South London, United Kingdom.
No problems, no baby, to get out of. I got to be down, down, down.
A Crime and Justice TV production.
inspiring a generation.
Assange also could be very closely monitored by both prison officers and the US government while being in Belmarsh prison. That's according to one former inmate of various other jails across the country.
Prison officers here and the security departments have got the resources to bug Assange's cell if they feel that they need to do that. In my opinion, I think that is likely. Prison officers will also be instructed to keep an eye on Assange, who he's talking to on the landing, and they will be making sure that he's monitored very closely. And it's also my opinion that the American government will be pressuring the British establishment for regular and up-to-date and consistent weekly, even daily intel on Julian Assange.